Hello, today we are going to be talking about controlling anger for our module. Make sure that you please get a pen or pencil and a sheet of paper to take notes during the presentation. You will have a quiz at the end of the module and activities, so please make sure that you do take notes along the way. Okay, let's get started. Defining anger. Anger is a natural emotion that usually stems from a perceived threat or loss. It affects our body, our thoughts, feelings, and our behavior. How do you express anger? What makes you angry? The goals for today's module is to understand anger and its roots in survival. Take concrete steps toward getting control of our anger. Identify warning signs and triggers. Identify healthier ways to express anger. And identify when to seek help. The cycle of anger. Anger typically follows a predictable pattern. Trigger, escalation, crisis, recovery, and depression. Let's take a look at each of these in depth. The trigger phase. The trigger phase happens when we perceive a threat or a loss, and the body prepares to respond. The body changes from the normal, adaptive state to the stress state. People have different triggers, which can come from the environment or our thoughts. The escalation phase. The escalation phase is the first appearance of anger response. The body begins preparing for a crisis following the trigger. You may start breathing rapidly, have an increased heart rate, or raised blood pressure. Once the escalation is reached, there is less chance of calming down. The body is beginning to prepare for fight or flight. The crisis phase. In the crisis phase, the anger reaction reaches its peak. Our bodies become fully alert, preparing to take action in response to the trigger. Logic and level-headedness may be limited or impaired during this phase. A person may become a danger to him or herself or others during this time. The recovery phase. The recovery phase happens when the anger is expended, or at least controlled, and there is now a steady return to a person's normal state. During this stage, reasoning and awareness of oneself returns. If the right intervention occurs, the return to normal progresses smoothly. However, an inappropriate intervention can reignite the anger and serve as a new trigger. The depression phase. The depression phase marks a return to a person's normal ways. There may be below normal vital signs, heart rate, while the body recovers. Full capacity returns at this stage. New awareness helps us evaluate what just happened. We may feel embarrassment, guilt, regret, and or depression in this phase. Let's take a look at the warning signs. The first step in gaining control of anger is to recognize its warning signs. You have to be aware of symptoms that your anger is about to build up so that you can catch yourself early and make the necessary intervention. This process involves taking yourself from the moment and observing your own reactions from a third-person point of view. There are a range of warning signs. Some are obvious, some are subtle. They can be physical, mental, emotional, and behavioral. Let's take a look at each of those. Some physical signs. You might experience a headache, clenched jaws, difficulty breathing, or maybe a stomach ache when you get angry. These are the physical signs. Mental signs. Poor concentration, thinking about vengeance, obsessing about the situation, or cynicism. Emotional signs. You might experience irritation, resentment, sadness, or guilt. And lastly, behavioral signs. You might see yourself pacing, raising your voice, cupping your fist with your other hand, or pounding your fist on a wall. These are all behavioral signs. Controlling your anger. Now that we are aware of warning signs of anger, what is the next step? There are some common do's and don'ts for controlling anger. Don't ignore anger. Some people respond to anger by not admitting, even to themselves, that they are angry. Defense mechanisms often used to ignore anger include laughing an issue off, distracting oneself from the problem, and trivializing the trigger's impact. Don't keep the anger inside. There are people who do recognize that they're angry. However, they choose to obsess about their anger in silence rather than express it. They can bear grudges for a long time. People like this, also called stuffers, are more likely to develop hypertension compared to others. They are also likely to just explode one day once the anger has built to the point that they can't keep it inside anymore. Don't get aggressive. The right to vent your anger doesn't extend to doing it in ways that can hurt others, hurt yourself, and damage property. Aggression can be verbal or physical. Don't get passive aggressive. Passive aggressiveness refers to indirect and underhanded means to get back at the person who made you angry. Examples of passive aggressive behaviors are gossiping, tardiness, and backbiting. Don't use non-constructive communication styles. Avoid the use of indirect attacks and unproductive statements. These include blaming, labeling, preaching, moralizing, ordering, warning, interrogating, ridiculing, and lecturing. Do acknowledge that you are angry. It is important that you know how to recognize that you are angry and give yourself permission to feel it. This can be as simple as saying to yourself, "I'm angry." Remember, you can't control something you don't admit exists. Do calm yourself before you say anything. In previous discussions, we saw how there is a biological reason why anger can feel overwhelming. Our body is engaged in a fight or flight response. It helps then to defer any reactions until you have reached the return to normal, adaptive phase of the anger cycle. Otherwise, you might end up saying or doing something that you'd later regret. Count 1 to 10. Do speak up when something is important to you. This is the opposite to keeping it all in. If a matter is important to you, so much so that keeping silent would just result in physical and mental symptoms, then let it out. If it's not possible to speak to the person concerned, at least look for a trusted friend or a mental health professional. Do explain how you're feeling in a manner that shows ownership and responsibility for your anger. Take ownership and responsibility for your feelings. This makes the anger within your control. You can't control other people. One way to take ownership and responsibility for your anger is through the use of I messages, which will be discussed in a later session.